Some stories go viral, others stay buried because no one would believe them. This one, it's different. I didn't stumble onto a ghost. I didn't see a demon. But what I delivered that night, it's still with me, and I've never eaten dinner the same way again. You get to a point in life where your desperation gets quieter. It stops screaming and just sits with you, like a passenger you stop trying to kick out. That's where I was. 37 years old, a decade into doing deliveries for a mid-range catering company that mostly served weddings and fundraisers, and just scraping by after a rough year. My wife had just had surgery. She was recovering at home on the meds we could barely afford. I was doing my best to keep the lights on and gas in a van with 180,000 miles on it that coughed every time it started, like it was reminding me it was running on borrowed time. So when dispatch called me at 7:12 p.m. that night, I almost let it ring out. But the second time they tried, I answered. Something in my gut said I needed to. It was Maya from scheduling. She sounded different, polite but stiff, like she was reading from a script. Hey, we've got a priority delivery. Just came in. High-value client, private estate. I asked her why they weren't sending one of the white glove couriers. She paused. They specifically requested low visibility, she said. No branding, no company van. Just you. That was weird. And the weirdness kept stacking. She said I'd be picking up the order from a private prep facility, not one of our usual kitchens. I'd need to sign an NDA before getting the details. No stops, no photos, no questions. I pulled up the NDA link she sent. 5 pages of tight legal language. Normally, these things are just standard liability and privacy clauses. But this one was different. It had words I'd never seen in any of our contracts. Biological inventory, organic protein transport, and client anonymity clause. No food descriptions, no vendor names, just redacted blocks and signature lines. Then I saw the payout. 4 times my normal overnight rate. I didn't hesitate. We needed the money. The deductible for my wife's surgery had wiped our savings. Rent was due next week, and I had no idea what the van was leaking, only that I couldn't afford to find out. I signed. The address led me to a facility I'd never seen before, even though it wasn't far from our main distribution hub. The GPS said I was there, but I didn't see any sign of a restaurant. Just a long, windowless white building tucked into an industrial zone, surrounded by barbed wire fencing and security cameras that followed me as I pulled in. The place smelled sharp, sterile, like bleach and cold metal. It looked more like a medical storage unit than a kitchen. 2 men were waiting by the loading bay. Black aprons, rubber gloves, mirrored sunglasses. At night, they didn't introduce themselves, didn't even say hello. They just nodded and rolled out 6 stainless steel coolers on thick industrial dollies. The kind you'd expect to see at a morgue, not a wedding buffet. They were waist-high, unmarked, and completely sealed. No vents, no locks I recognized. No labels indicating hot or cold. Just metal. Sleek and silent. One of the men gestured to the back of my van. I opened it. Together, they slid the coolers into place. Each one made a heavy, wet sound when it landed, like something dense shifting inside. When the last one was in, I started to secure them with bungee cords. That's when one of them finally spoke. He stepped a little closer. He had a faded scar that ran from behind his ear down the side of his neck, pink and shiny, like an old burn that never healed right. "Drive safe," he said. Then, with a strange half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, he added, "And don't open anything." He slapped the side of the last cooler. It made a sound I wasn't prepared for. Not a dull knock, not the thunk of Tupperware or trays. It was softer. A low, wet slide, like a heavy raw steak shifting inside a bag. Something thick and cold sliding against metal. That sound stuck with me. It clung to my ears long after I pulled away from the loading dock. As I pulled onto the freeway, I kept glancing at the coolers in the rearview mirror. They just sat there, motionless, sealed, but I couldn't shake the sound. Couldn't shake the way the guy said they're already hungry. Who says that about catering? I've done plenty of weird runs, delivered ostrich meat, frog legs, even unpasteurized cheese that smelled like roadkill. But it was always labeled, always traceable. This was different, too quiet, too clean. And I had a long road ahead of me. The canyon road grew darker than I remembered. No lights, just the curve of pavement vanishing into the shadows, trees pressing close on either side. My headlights flicked off rocks and low-hanging branches, casting quick shadows that looked like limbs reaching out. The GPS started struggling a few miles in. It kept rerouting between paths that didn't seem to exist. I followed its final instructions onto a gravel road so narrow and remote, it looked like no one had driven it in weeks. My tires crunched slowly over loose stone. I was moving maybe 15 miles an hour. The van rattled with every bump. That's when I noticed the smell. It came in slow, subtle, a hint of something not quite right. Sweet, but metallic, like orange peel soaked in vinegar. Not rot, not blood. Something cleaner, but still wrong. The kind of smell that settles at the back of your throat and refuses to leave. I rolled down the window. The night air hit me sharp and cold. But it didn't help. The smell wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the back of the van. The coolers. I told myself it was just meat. Pork, maybe, or lamb. Something exotic. That's why they needed privacy. That's why the NDA had weird phrases. But I couldn't stop thinking about the weight of them. The way they'd moved. The cold mist that seemed to cling to the seals. And then my phone rang. The number was unlisted. I answered through the van's hands-free system. "Do not stop," a voice said. Calm, male, measured, not Maya from dispatch. "You're now on private property. There are no roads beyond this. No lights, no cameras, no witnesses." I swallowed. "Who is this?" "They're tracking your route. They know what you're carrying. They know what's missing. They know if you've tampered." I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off. "And they're very hungry." Click, that was it. Dead silence. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel with hands that suddenly felt like they weren't mine. The next turn appeared almost out of nowhere. A break in the trees. 2 massive pine trunks framing an unmarked gravel path. There were no lights, no signs. Just dark earth and woods pressing in on both sides. I slowed to a crawl. I had a choice. I could have stopped, turned around, tossed the coolers, and never looked back. But I didn't, because I'd already looked inside one. And what I'd seen, what I'd taken, was now sitting behind my seat. That was the moment I stopped being a driver and became something else. Not a guest, not a servant, something in between. And I drove forward, into the trees, as the smell thickened behind me. Somewhere near the halfway mark, the road curved into a small gravel turnout. Just a patch of ground with a lone wooden bench and a crooked street lamp barely throwing any light. I told myself I was just stopping to stretch, maybe check the cargo straps, but if I'm being honest, I stopped because I was scared. I needed to look again, needed to prove to myself that what I had seen earlier was just meat, that I was imagining the rest. I walked around to the rear of the van and opened the back doors. The smell hit me again, stronger this time, cold and syrupy. It clung to the inside of my nostrils and sat heavy in my mouth. I opened the cooler I'd tampered with earlier, my breath fogging in the air. The pressure seal released with a hiss, and a soft puff of white mist spilled out. Inside was a vacuum-sealed black bag, thick as a bed pillow and slick with frost. I peeled back one corner. The meat inside was clean, deep red marbled with thick white fat, almost beautiful. It didn't look rotten or strange, just expensive, high grade, the kind of cut you'd expect to see at a luxury steakhouse. My chest loosened with a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding. I actually laughed. Jesus, I muttered. It's just meat. Then I did something I still can't explain. I reached in and took one out. The bag was cold and heavier than it looked. Solid. It didn't bend like normal cuts of meat do. I slid it into the personal cooler I kept behind my seat. Then I hesitated, reached back in, took one more. 2. They won't miss 2, I whispered. I shut the lid, shut the back doors, got back in the driver's seat. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the dashboard. The air was too still. I started the van and kept going. The gravel road narrowed until the trees pressed in like a tunnel. My headlights were the only light in that entire forest. I passed under branches that scraped against the roof like fingers dragging along a coffin lid. And then, without warning, the trees parted. And there it was. The mansion. Modernist. Massive. Stark concrete walls, flat roof lines, sharp geometry that felt too cold to be a home. There were no open windows, no warm yellow lights glowing from inside. Just faint gold sconces by the front door casting light into the driveway like spotlights on a stage. As I approached, 2 black iron gates slid open soundlessly. No guard, no intercom, just silent acceptance. I pulled into a circular driveway already lined with vehicles more expensive than my mortgage. A matte black Rolls, a Tesla Model S with custom blackout windows, something low and German I couldn't even name. There were no people, just cars, parked like artifacts. I shut off the engine. As soon as the headlights died, a man appeared from the shadows. Black suit, no name tag, no earpiece, but everything about him said authority. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. Unload here, he said. Kitchens through the east corridor. He pointed behind the house. I opened the back. My breath fogged again, even though it wasn't cold outside. The temperature had dropped without warning. My fingers felt numb as I grabbed the dolly and loaded the first cooler. The man led me through a long, empty hallway. The walls were concrete. The floor polished so perfectly I could see my reflection, small, moving, unsure. The silence was suffocating. Even the wheels of the dolly seemed to quiet themselves, like the house absorbed sound on purpose. We passed a large dining room, and that's when I saw them. Standing in front of a tall window framed by their own reflections were two people, Oprah Winfrey and Diddy. They didn't speak. They didn't turn to acknowledge me. Oprah's posture was serene, hands folded, her eyes watching the tree line like she was waiting for a storm to arrive. Diddy sipped something dark from a crystal glass, his face unreadable. They were dressed like royalty, every detail immaculate. And yet, something about them felt distant, like they weren't really there, or maybe like I wasn't. I looked away and kept pushing the dolly. The kitchen was nothing like the hallway. It was blindingly white, sterile like a lab. Stainless steel everywhere. The hum of refrigerators. The hiss of gas burners. But still, no talking. The kitchen staff moved like machines, each with identical charcoal uniforms and latex gloves. A woman with a pixie haircut and perfectly clear safety glasses pointed to a dumbwaiter in the corner. "They'll be plated downstairs," she said. As I parked the cooler beside it, she opened it using a biometric thumbprint. Inside was a sealed bag, identical to the ones I had taken. She lifted it with both hands like it was a sacred object. "Perfect marbling," she whispered. "No veins, no bruising." Then she looked up at me and smiled. "They'll be pleased." She passed the bag to another worker who carried it away like a trophy through a pair of double doors. I stood there, still pretending to secure the cooler straps. But I was rattled. My heart thudded beneath my jacket. That smell was back again. Faint, floral, metallic, like citrus and copper left too long in a warm room. Then the woman turned back. "You can take the last cooler to storage. Follow him." She nodded toward a tall man pushing a bin down a different hallway. I followed him. The tile under my feet changed from white to dull gray. The fluorescent lights above turned softer, dimmer. We passed through a narrow corridor with no signs, just blank doors and keypads. At the end of the hallway was a metal door with a biometric scanner. The man pressed his hand against it. It clicked, hissed, and then it opened. A blast of freezer air hit my face. Cold, dry, surgical. Inside was a long room lined with racks and shelves. Steel hooks dangled from the ceiling. Frost clung to plastic wrap and barcoded labels. At first glance, it looked like a high-end butcher shop. Then I read the tags. Infant ribs, delicate. Juvenile prime thigh. Neonate thymus, small plate. Hammer shoulder. My spine locked. I turned toward the end of the room, and that's when I saw it. A human leg. Pale, smooth, wrapped at the hip in vacuum-sealed plastic, hanging from a steel hook like a cured ham. Labeled, barcoded, tagged like any other cut of meat. I couldn't breathe. The man with me, he didn't even flinch. He opened the cooler like he was unpacking groceries. 6 units hum, he said out loud. 2 thigh, 1 tenderloin, 1 mixed offal. I backed away. I didn't care anymore about my job, about my van, about anything. I just wanted to leave. And then I heard her voice. "You're not authorized to view the inventory." I turned slowly. There she was, Oprah Winfrey. She stood at the threshold of the freezer like she had always been there, regal, unbothered. Her silk shawl fluttered slightly in the cold. Diamond earrings glinted in the soft freezer light. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. "You got curious," she said gently. "That's normal. Curiosity's the first doorway to elevation." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Diddy stepped in beside her, calm, hands in his coat pockets like he was studying the room. "Do you know what separates the powerful from the obedient?" he asked. I shook my head. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. Appetite. Oprah stepped forward, her gaze never leaving mine. "We don't ask permission. We consume what serves us. Flesh, energy, influence." She stopped beside a sealed tray, tapped it gently with a manicured nail. "Delicacies, forgotten parts, untapped fuel." I felt my knees buckle slightly. My stomach churned. "It's not about taste," Diddy added. "It's about alignment. You eat the weak to ascend." I whispered, "Why me?" Oprah tilted her head. "You delivered. You peaked. You took. That's the first step. Most pretend they didn't see. But you didn't." Diddy stepped forward. "You're halfway through the door," he said. "Might as well step in." There was no pitch, no pressure, just a terrifying invitation. Oprah turned toward the exit and smiled. "Dinner is about to be served," she said. "You're welcome to stay. If you eat, you'll never be hungry again." They left me standing there, frozen, changed, alone in the cold, with something inside me I couldn't name anymore. I don't remember leaving the freezer. Not really. I must have passed half a dozen people, made at least 3 wrong turns, bumped into a prep cart, maybe we even apologized. But no one stopped me. No one looked at me, because they didn't need to. Once Oprah said, "You're halfway through the door," it was like the house recognized me. Like I no longer needed permission to move, but no longer had the choice to walk away. By the time I got back to the van, I was soaked in cold sweat. My hands were trembling. I sat behind the wheel and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look scared. I looked different. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been 20. The trees around the estate whispered with wind that didn't seem to reach the driveway. I saw another catering van pass me as I started the engine. Newer model, clean paint job, young driver behind the wheel. He smiled and waved. I didn't wave back. He didn't know what he was delivering. Not yet. That was 3 years ago. I stopped setting a plate for myself a while back. I don't eat at the table anymore. Something about it feels wrong. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I smelled. It shows up sometimes, that smell, in quiet places, in clean rooms, always the same. Warm, floral, sweet, but left too long. It doesn't hit like rot. It creeps in gently, like perfume sprayed on a corpse, like something meant to comfort you that instead clings like sickness. The first time I smelled it after that night, I was just sitting alone in my office. I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee. The second time, I was watching a press conference on TV and caught it coming from the screen. The third time, I knew better than to react. I just sat still, breathing through my mouth. I tried to convince myself that night at the mansion was a blur, one strange evening. But the truth is, it's never stopped happening. I see the signs more now. That stillness in a room. The way a person holds their fork. The faint trace of something sweet on the back of your tongue even when you haven't eaten. And I'm not the only one.